Everybody, it's very nice to sorry, I just have to press got it here. As a reminder, we are recording this event, so it's really nice to see people out today. We can see all the tiles. We set this up as kind of a Zoom meeting, so if you just want to see who's speaking, you can click on view, which is on your upper right corner, and you can just view just the speaker, because it might be a bit too much to see all the tiles all at once. So good evening, welcome from BCIT. My name is Caroline Depetit. I'm the Associate Dean for Business Administration, and I will really just talk for a few minutes to start with, and then let our expert panel and our moderator take over. But we'll do I'm welcoming you today from the Squamish territory. I live in Squamish, so I'm very lucky to be to be a guest on these beautiful territories. I was lucky also to work from home today and still at home tonight, so welcome. I'm going to start I won't introduce the panel. I'll leave that to Julie, our moderator, to do so, but I would like to introduce you to Julie Nolin, who's going to lead this discussion on the do's and don'ts of using imagery, art, and cultural artifact or so on in our marketing or in business. So this is kind of the topic, and again, Julie will talk a little bit more about that. But Julie, we're very lucky to have Julie tonight. Julie is actually a BCIT instructor. So BC is a faculty member in the School of Communication, Computing and Academic Study, although teaches communication and also teaches in broadcast, which is in the School of Business. Julie is herself Korean Métis and has worked for many years. She looks very young when I look at your bio and see how when you started, you've had lots of experience. So you must have started
lots of facelifts.
Yes, there you go. So she's worked for many years in media as a newspaper reporter and editor, photographer, and in television as an anchor and producer. So we're very lucky to have her moderate this tonight. She has also directed a documentary and is a writer for a documentary called Sharing Circle on APTN. I did have to look at what APTN was. Sorry, Aboriginal People's Television Network. She's passionate about diversity, inclusion, and intercultural competency. I also read somewhere that you're a busy mom of 2 boys. So am I, so we have that connection, and the boy life is very Merle as well, I think you yeah, so
oh yeah,
busy boy energy. So welcome, Julie. I'll leave it to you to kind of take it from here. I'll put turn my camera off, and again, as a reminder, if you just want to see the person talking, go to view and just see the speaker, and we'll go from here. I'll see you at the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Caroline. Yeah, welcome to our panel discussion tonight on the do's and don'ts of using Indigenous imagery, art, and culture. And yes, I'll be your moderator this evening. We would like to begin, though, by acknowledging that we are fortunate to be able to gather on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, which includes the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I would also like to acknowledge at this time that I'm speaking to you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation. We would also like to thank you for being here with us this evening, because we appreciate your sincere support in honoring Indigenous imagery as part of truth and reconciliation. And as such, this is, as we all realize, an important step in healing as we move into the future. We wanted to also just quickly thank the Indigenous Initiatives Department in the School of Business and Media at BCIT. That's Ron Kessler, Caroline Depetit, and Maria Bushma for organizing this event. Thank you so much for getting us all here. And as moderator, like I said, very proud to be Métis and Cree, and my roots are, just so you know, Onion Lake Cree Nation in Alberta. So a bit about me. Please also take note that this meeting is being recorded, and just a gentle reminder to ensure that your microphones are off. We also do welcome your questions, but we would like a little bit of an introduction about you in the chat, and we will get to those questions later on when the panel has answered some of these questions. So please do feel free to pop those into the chat. So without any further ado, let's get to the panelists for this evening's session. And the first panelist we have is Chattis Leo, and Chattis is Indigenous from the Jamalco First Nation in BC and the Stilagomish tribe of Indians in Washington State. So Chattis is also a first-year broadcast and online journalism student, and he's the host producer of Our Native Land through Czech TV. We're just so happy to have you here, Chattis. Jamie Campbell is she is from the Curve Lake First Nation, and she is Anishinaabe. Am I saying that correctly? Anishinaabe as an artist. She currently resides on the unceded territory in British Columbia of the Succinct First Nation. Jamie is the designer behind the White Otter Design Company, which incorporates traditional and artistry techniques with contemporary and personal style, and she aims to explore her connection to land and culture through beadwork, writing, fashion, and visual arts. And her work is inspired by her roots, the land, and her family, which is amazing to me. Merle Alexander practices Indigenous resource law, empowering nations through title and rights affirmation, sustainable economic development, and environmental conservation. And Keenan Beavis is the founder of Canada's largest Indigenous-owned marketing agencies, Longhouse Media. He's won all kinds of awards, so that's pretty cool that we have him here. He is passionate about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, business and economic development through entrepreneurship. So welcome to all of our panelists. It's so amazing that we can have this incredible group with us tonight. So our very first question that we have for the panel is, what is cultural heritage, and when is it being misappropriated? Now, who would like to go first?
I'll raise my hand on that one for sure. First of all, I'd like to say that it's so nice to see so many familiar faces. Jamie Campbell, we're very lucky to have her here. She is the best. I'm very happy to see her face. Our visits have done a lot of work together. I'm also coming to you from the unceded traditional ancestral territory of the Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Kwantlen First Nations. And to your question, when is cultural heritage being misappropriated? I think it's as simple as like a 3-step process. One, you have to ask permission. If you're going to use art, imagery, anything like that, just ask permission. It's very easy to do so. When you're using it, credit the artist and or acknowledge the culture. And then the third part, which oftentimes will be waived, but you should always offer compensation if you're going to use someone's artwork. And I think if you do that, your brand is going to be protected and you're going to feel like you're respecting the culture, which you really should.
Thanks, Keenan. I think this makes, your answer is such an easy transition to Jamie. And Jamie, love your art in the background. And how do you feel about this as an artist yourself?
I think just to answer the beginning part of your question about cultural heritage, it's, if you kind of like look it up, it talks a lot about like tangible and intangible assets that are, when I think about Indigenous cultural heritage, like they're often passed down to us. And that's, it can be really different between all of our different nations across Turtle Island. And that is also a really important consideration, is that, we're not a monolith. And so sometimes asking for permission, you have to ask the appropriate people for permission, or you have to ask the appropriate artists for permission. But I think, particularly in artwork, we've seen it really, it's caused a lot of damage, especially in the fashion world and the art world. And you can see a lot of examples right now. If you look around at Aviator Nation, Urban Outfitters, Anthropology, they're all, running up into quite a bit of misappropriation of Indigenous artwork. And there's a few brands who are starting to do it well, but yeah, I think that, there's a lot of opportunity for partnership, but we just have to get better at having those discussions.
Excellent point.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there, Jamie. You took the words right out of my mouth when it comes to tangible and intangible, right? Because there's when you think of cultural heritage, there's the parts where we're talking about artifacts and physical items that have been passed down through generations, and then there's the intangible, which is stories and methods of how things have been done for ages, and then that becomes the difficulties when you're trying to get that permission. You know, who do you ask? How do you ask? Where do you go? Where do you start? Right. And that's the thing is to do your research as well, too, because you might find that you've gone and asked somebody for permission, and they might think that they have the right to give that permission, but you might find out that, oh no, I don't think they're the right person. And so that's something to be really careful when it comes to the intangible part, because it's not something physical and it's something that's permission, that's a vocal permission, and they're giving you something with their words. It's important to make sure that if you're asking, are you asking the right person? And and then backing up that research to make sure that that person in fact has the right to give that that artwork, that knowledge, or that cultural heritage to you to use in whatever way that you're hoping to use it.
Merle, would you like to jump in?
Sure. I mean, now I'll sound a lot like a lawyer, a bit maybe. I mean, I think like one of the I generally agree with everyone's like definition of cultural heritage. I mean, I think it's also something of a fluid definition. Obviously, that aspect of passing it from knowledge from one generation to the next has a real collective aspect to it. So I think that's one of the parts that I don't know whether or not we're agreeing or disagreeing with each other, but I think you really need to do your due diligence to ensure that the person even that the artist themselves has the ability to commercialize the intangible cultural heritage that they are claiming right to, because certainly things like songs that are connected to a specific territory, to a specific role, like in a big house or something, they may need the consent of a family, of a specific First Nation to be able to sing that song again. So I think one of the important parts, I mean, a different way of saying it is this, that we have to recognize that our own cultural heritage, Indigenous cultural heritage, has a body of law already that governs it. And just relying on Canadian intellectual property law for just getting consents and permissions is not necessarily going to be sufficient enough. In fact, that's part of, I think, that one of the responsibilities that Indigenous people have is sort of raise the bar on not just following what Canadian IP law or international IP law requires of us, but actually following the law of the Indigenous legal orders that apply to whatever the specific heritage is.
Okay, well, here's a great way to segue into the next question then. When is Merle, following existing intellectual property laws, usually enough or not enough when appropriating Indigenous art and culture?
Well, almost never, really, I think. Like, I mean, like the World Intellectual Property Organization, like the sort of legal monolith that governs IP law internationally, did a fact-finding mission about now 20-something years ago, traveled all over the world, spoke to Indigenous peoples and nations throughout every single country, and asked the question, is IP protecting your Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous cultural expressions? And the answer, like almost uniformly from nation to nation, was that the IP system is failing to protect Indigenous cultural heritage. So, I mean, I think that's why actually using contracts and protocols and negotiating arrangements directly with the appropriate Indigenous peoples has become a bit more of a norm, is to use contract, because we're almost contracting out of the failure of IP to actually be sufficient enough. I mean, especially when it comes to the fact that cultural heritage has that intergenerational component, focuses on collectives and not individuals, and also because of that multi-generational component goes beyond the life of an individual. So the IP system is so designed around the individual, I think that it often, it often sort of fails to be sufficient in itself. course, that's also a real friction, I think, between artists, artists and nations themselves, is that we need to sort of get our own like houses in order. And while Indigenous groups are still trying to rebuild, and reinvigorate their own Indigenous legal orders, in the absence of it, I think artists are relying just on sort of the Canadian mainstream IP law.
It seems like it's a very Canadian thing that our laws still have to catch up with, you know, the current reality. Is there anyone else comfortable to jump in? Jamie, have you had any experience in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say, maybe from like less of a legal perspective, is that like many of us don't even know IP law. Like, we are artists, like we're creators, and we work within our families and our family systems, and we create art that's often passed to us, or that, you know, it comes from our specific nations, and like I know for myself, like there's been a lot of discussion, like it's actually become quite complex now that so much of our art is being shared really openly on social media and websites, and, you know, all of these different sort of mediums. You almost like your art kind of, if you Google yourself, you're like, I'm blown away sometimes at where my artwork has shown up without permission and without any relationship and without anything like that. And many of us, like we aren't lawyers, and we don't know IP laws, and we don't know those sorts of things. And we rely heavily, like for myself, I rely heavily on like relationships and relationship building. And, you know, if somebody wants to use, you know, my beadwork or my artwork in something, my first question is like, why? Like, why do you want to do that? And what's your existing relationship? You know, what's your understanding? Do you know, are you wanting to use it just for Indigenous Heritage Month? Are you wanting to use it just, you know, to quote unquote, this word is so overused, but like to look woke as a brand? Or like, you know, what's your ongoing relationship with Indigenous people, and what's your motivation?
Yeah. Keenan?
Yeah, so I think both Merle and Jamie are making really great points. And existing intellectual property laws, they may cover a brand or a business to legally use imagery, but to be respectful and as a byproduct also protect your brand, you should always, even if the art's in the public domain, acknowledge the culture, give credit to the artist, and find some way to give back to the community which created the art that you're hoping to use.
Yeah. Chattis, anything to add?
Not a whole lot, really. I haven't had a lot of experience dealing with IP laws, but I do can agree with Keenan there that the best thing to do is to just ask. It's the most respectful thing to do, and you know, I can't stress that enough. And I find that too when I am interviewing guests on the show, and we have artists, and you know, just because I interviewed them doesn't mean I can grab their art and put it you know, on TV, right? I still have to ask. I still say, you know, like, would you be okay? You know, and then I also ask, just because you have a website, I'm not going to just pull whatever off of there. Like, can you tell me specifically what you want on there and which ones you want me to avoid? So it's I think a lot of people can assume just because, you know, you build a relationship with somebody that you can just go ahead and take them. They're not going to get mad with you. You still got to ask regardless. And I'm very careful with that when it comes to producing the show, because the last thing I want is to, you know, ruin a bridge, but also, you know, build a poor representation of the media that, you know, to just feel like we can go and grab whatever we want because it's public domain, right? So it's walking that fine line between permission and what you're allowed to grab. So.
Yeah, well, and your answer, I think, is a good launching off point for the next question, which is, you know, what are the costs and the risks of misappropriation? Which is, I mean, we're here because it's immense. Who would like to tackle that one first?
I'll jump in. So companies, I have a branding agency. Companies spend a lot of money building a brand and advertising. Coca-Cola has probably spent, I think, if I remember correctly, around $4 billion last year creating their brand. Nike spent over $3 billion. So one misstep through misappropriation can be a really costly mistake And it could be easily avoided by doing that 3-step thing that I mentioned at the beginning. Just ask permission, credit the artist or acknowledge the culture, and 3, offer compensation. The compensation part may be waived, but you should always, even if it's offered, still give credit to the artist and acknowledge the culture.
Excellent answer. Jamie, as an artist.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the benefits of social media is there's immense pressure on brands to not appropriate, and I think for the first time we're starting to see, like this morning, I saw this incredible collaboration between Gabriella Hearst and Naomi Glasses, who's a Navajo artist. She does like luxury handbags and luxury fashion. And rather than sort of misappropriating that Navajo symbolism, she actually partnered with a designer and they released a collection together, and part of the proceeds from that collection are going to support that community. And they go to support the artist. And I think that that's sort of the benefit of doing it the right way, whereas we're seeing, I don't know if anyone's familiar, if you want to go check it out there, there's a brand online right now named Aviator Nation. They've appropriated hugely from several tribes in the United States, and it's not going well. It's not looking good for the brand at all. And I think those are the kinds of things that you need to consider. And again, that goes back to like motivation as to why are you doing this and why is this happening? Because I think at the core of appropriation is that often the heritages and the cultures that are being appropriated often come from a place that there's an imbalance of power. There was oppression at one point. Like for a lot of us artists, like we actually, our symbolism and our art and our songs and our ceremonies were outlawed at one point. Mm-hmm. And so for large brands to come along and just sort of cherry pick the pieces that they want to promote, or anybody to do that, it's not really a matter, it's not so much a matter of ownership, because that kind of further, perpetuates a lot of issues, but it's a matter of respect.
Yeah. And it's counterintuitive, isn't it, to think that misappropriating is going to help the healing that we have to do, right?
Absolutely.
So what makes for a responsible creative collaboration, and how can all businesses form those important respectful relationships with Indigenous businesses, including artists? Merle, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think the basic framework of what Keenan's sort of like outlined as sort of those 3 sort of principles, like often end up forming something more formal, like which is probably where people like me get involved, like where there actually is some sort of like formal legal relationship that grants some sort of licensing or some sort of granting permission. That takes like a lots of different forms, but I think like a responsible like collaboration usually is something that looks much more like a partnership of some sort, or where there's some real equitable benefit sharing that flows between the parties, like where there isn't that disproportionate, inequitable like balance of power. And in the end, I think like it's I think the way that like businesses are starting to develop much more respectful relationship is partially driven by that sort of those negative examples. Mm-hmm. Like, because I think there's lots of like sort of misappropriators have seen like the ill outcome of them, like say Donna Karen like stealing Inuit image, or like I can't remember how to pronounce the particular garment that DKNY sort of stole, like created these like hoodies with really long hoods. I can't remember, you probably remember, it was about a decade ago or so. But there's lots of the worst examples, I think, have created a better framework. And to me, I think it's best like when there is something that's a bit more like formal in nature, so that no one sort of goes back and questions it, particularly like when it's really something that ends up having there's a real business to it, where there is like a real financial benefit that's going to flow from the use of Indigenous artwork. It also, I think, it's just positive evidence that you're trying to do the right thing, and you have like that sort of formal relationship that sort of spells that out. as opposed to something that's a bit more sort of loose and like it's just sort of like flows based on permissions. Because I think at the end of the day, you want to be able to have, if it's really has a substantial value to be able to use in that particular Indigenous art in your branding or however you use it in your business, then I think it's appropriate to have like completely legally certain and financially certain rights, because that's the opposite is true when I think when it's misappropriated, not used, is that there's a lot of legal and financial vulnerability.
Absolutely. Jamie, you're nodding your head. Did you want to add anything more, or Chattis?
Nope, nothing to add. I was just agreeing.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to agree with that for sure. Chattis?
Yeah, this conversation kind of brings me, it might not be totally answering the question, but it kind of reminds me of the the story we heard a while back with Braden Holtby. He was a Vancouver Canucks goalie, and he had a helmet made with a bunch of native artwork on it. And, the media had grabbed a hold of that. And unfortunately, the design and the artwork, everything on that helmet wasn't consulted with the local First Nation community. So it was just a native design that was put on a hockey helmet with no prior consultation and permission and the respect that you need from, that community to put that kind of artwork, on that helmet. But the thing that can flourish from that, and the thing that, is beneficial, is when you actually take the time and build a partnership with an artist and a community. You can create a helmet that looks better, and two,
Yes.
and two, you create a long-lasting relationship. So what ended up happening is Luke Marston, who's a local Sunimis First Nation artist, quite well known, ended up creating this helmets. They built a relationship, and now he is used on a regular basis to consult with the Vancouver Canucks, and it's really, these mistakes happen, and that's the important thing, is that we are human, and as long as it was done unintentionally, we can forgive people who have made the mistake. Not to forget, it's important that we know that these things happen, and sometimes there are people out there that take stuff and they don't feel bad, right? But in general, I like to have good faith in humanity that we're going to learn from this, we're going to grow, and then you're going to build that relationship together and build a friendship a partnership rather, that's going to benefit both the nation and the business, or the person that's involved in any given situation that I'm mentioning. So
yeah, we've certainly made enough mistakes in the past, and let's learn from them, right? And so it takes me to the next question. What are the benefits of taking part in a responsible collaboration? Who would like to go first?
I'll pop in and I'll answer it fairly quickly. I think any business should develop friendly relationships with people from a variety of cultures, and ones that aren't necessarily solely built on transactions, like just meet and talk semi-regularly. And when it is time to collaborate, things will just come naturally. And having that resource on hand is going to be one of the biggest benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Accessing cultural knowledge, traditions, and most importantly, that unique insight from a worldview that may differ from that which is in your organization already is going to be a really useful toolkit at growing your business and brand.
Yeah, 100%.
Keenan, I can agree with you there. It's kind of like building a friend, like having a friendship where it's not just for benefit, right? It's not like, it's a friend that calls you, see how you're doing, and just doesn't just call you to, use your truck because they're moving, if you know what I mean.
That's a great example. And when it's time to actually collaborate, when it's actually like a real collaboration opportunity, you're going to know who to call.
Yeah. Jamie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm echoing the same thing as I used to do community governance work and consultation work, and we formed a lot of relationships with industry partners, and most of them showed up when they needed something, when they needed an answer for a project, or when they needed, and our leadership always said, come by when you're in town, you don't need anything, come have a cup of coffee, come have a cup of tea. And I think you can do similar things with artists. And I would take it a step further, is I would really want to know, are you also building sort of your allyship outside of this individual relationship. And, you know, there's a lot of different ways to do that, like, you know, like honoring the TRC report and, you know, answering calls to action and all of those sorts of things. Like for myself, like that's something that I would look for in a partnership, is like, what are your intentions beyond our relationship? Because I think that's really important.
And, you know, before you mute off, Jamie, I think too, you're speaking about something that's crucial in so many Indigenous cultures around the world, and that is the relationship needs to be there. That, you know, so many First Nations just want to have relationships with these different stakeholders, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, and for me, like that really has to be built in reciprocity. And, you know, I think that's really important. And if we're ever going to, you know, move into any sort of, if we're going to move forward in these arenas, like, I think those have to be fundamental.
Yeah, absolutely. And incredibly meaningful too. So the next question that we have, and we're going to probably keep you for another 10, 15 minutes, by the way. What can the business world do to contribute to the ethical treatment of Indigenous cultural heritage? Wow, what a huge question to ask. And that's, I think, why many of us are here tonight. Who would like to tackle that one first? Merle, what do you think?
Where angels fear to tread, fools rush in, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think that like one of the most important things that the business world could do. I mean, certainly, I think, you know, and maybe even like more importantly, in the last couple of years, I think corporate Canada has been looking sort of ways of honoring reconciliation, and some of it done clumsily, some of it done like with the best intention and failing at it miserably, and other times I think like there is some much more positive examples. So I mean, I think like for me, I still tend to sort of see things a bit through like that sort of like legal business lens, which is I think like one of the best things that the businesses can do is by by proving out the best practice. So by developing standardized best practices that actually allow for benefit sharing arrangements that are equitable and enforceable, and doing it again and again. Because at the end of the day, like I think you're trying to build like the business world does need to like build trust with Indigenous peoples, particularly you know, sometimes maybe the most like vulnerable Indigenous artists, like which are maybe some of the most vulnerable Indigenous entrepreneurs that are out there. You know, so I think like in some ways, like the proof is in the pudding. If you're treating entrepreneurs that are working so closely with their own to raise and uplift their own values, uplifting them and doing that continuously develops like a higher and ethical standard. And the truth is that businesses follow each other, and like when a best practice is sort of set out and something is made of it, then somebody wants to do the same. And then hopefully that sort of creates an actual continuous momentum, which I think is where we are starting to slowly trend. There's obviously been a lot of mistakes along that same path, but I think that it's that standardized best practice, I think, that makes continuous change and creates like a change that's actually a legacy.
Oh yeah, for sure. Keenan, I see you nodding.
Well, Merle's a smart guy. I have to nod along with what he says.
Absolutely.
You know, to answer the question, like, how can the business world contribute to the ethical treatment of Indigenous like cultural heritage? I would say collaborate, work with Indigenous-led businesses, and don't discriminate. You know, it's oftentimes people unfortunately see our brand name and maybe think something that's not necessarily true about us, you know, and I think that if the business world does just give Indigenous businesses a chance, Indigenous employees a chance, Indigenous like new graduates a chance, I think they're going to be pleasantly surprised, and they're going to get access to a lot of information and kind of cultural heritage that will help grow their business.
Yeah, very much so. And Jamie, I'm sure your experience has probably been positive and negative at times. And what would you wish for the business world to start to do more of?
Yeah, like I think that, you know, there's my mind's bouncing all over the place because I have a few different thoughts on this, but you know, it's a little bit off track, but it's similar. As I think about, I was part of this program one time, and we were teaching a program. It was being funded by industry and government. It was meant to be about Indigenous business, and the whole concept was decolonizing Indigenous business and helping Indigenous entrepreneurs. You know, and there was all these guidelines that, you know, we couldn't, you know, the students couldn't build business around alcohol or around drugs, or, you know, there was parameters. And then coming in as Indigenous faculty, it was like, okay, so how do we also build parameters here that, you know, protect and safeguard our artists, our entrepreneurs, our communities, and how do we practice community care when we do business, you know, particularly things around, you know, missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, around Orange Shirt Day, all of those sorts of things. And it's, you know, I think we have a responsibility in the business world where we also should be allowed to lay some of those parameters out that are more culturally significant to us.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, and I think that that's really important. And you know, like, to take that a step further, like, I don't have all the answers to this, but I get really excited when we talk about how do we actually decolonize what that business relationship looks like, and what's important to me beyond the financial, you know, and as an Indigenous entrepreneur, it's really important to me to practice community care and to give back to my community and to uplift youth and support elders and all those sorts of things. And so how can I enter into relationships that's also contributing to that? And how can we, you know, make businesses aware of, like, that's how we operate, and those are the things that are important to us, and those are our values. And you know, I don't necessarily know how to do that yet, but it makes me excited to think about it. And it's just something that I think is really important.
Yeah, well, hey, the first step is we're talking about it, so thank you for that
sure.
answer. Chattis, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, in regards to, you know, how we're, you know, gonna build an appropriate relationship to respect Indigenous cultural heritage, for me, I think it really ties in well with personal actions that people can do to help with reconciliations, well, personal acts of reconciliation. And there's this really great CBC article that was released back in 2018. So if you actually Google personal acts of reconciliation, it's one of the first things that shows up, and it talks about you know, reading books and going to cultural events, you know, volunteering for Indigenous nonprofit organizations, supporting Indigenous artists and musicians. So there's about 10 different things that you can personally do that's been recommended in ways to help you as a person to really understand, you know, what Indigenous people have gone through, and even Indigenous artists have to go through, and how do we turn that around and be respectful and move together as a society, and you know, build a Canada that we're proud of, and a greater nation where we can really share those experiences with artists and with the culture and build it together, right? So I highly recommend looking that up. And when it comes to taking care of cultural heritage, I just kind of reel back to what can I do as a person to help with reconciliation. And that list, although it's personal and talks about using an individual, it's completely transferable to a business. So, you know, if you want to go to a cultural event, well, maybe your whole staff needs to go to one, right? So it's very interchangeable, and it's I think that's a really good place to start for anybody.
Okay, well, let's try and shift this spotlight onto the folks who have you know, kindly organized this event for us, and that is, what role do business schools, and that would include BCIT, what do business schools have to do with contributing to the ethical treatment of Indigenous cultural heritage? Oof, there's a lot that can be done. So where do we start? Keenan, what do you think?
Well, I'm starting to feel a little bit old because it's been a few years since I've graduated from my business program. And I will say that my school did do a good job in incorporating some of the Indigenous values and teaching about the Indigenous perspective in their curriculum. And I think more and more universities are starting to do just that, integrating Indigenous value systems and at least referencing and acknowledging the Indigenous worldview and how it may be different. But like BCIT is doing a great job. Events like this, collaborating with people like me or Merle or Jamie or Chattis, like really great steps are being made. And I think things, if they keep progressing in the way that they're going, the world is going to be in a much, much better place in a month, a year, 10 years from now. I'm loving seeing it.
Oh, my heart loves that, that entirely. Thank you so much for that. Jamie, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Keenan, like things like this, you know, like talking about appropriation, like building that kind of awareness, like that's a huge first step. But, you know, I also think that schools and post-secondary education in particular in general, like really needs to have a lot of these movements be Indigenous led. And we need to like uplift and listen to Indigenous voices in those spaces. And again, remember that we're not all a monolith. And so sometimes, you know, what might work for me might be very different for another artist and all those kinds of things. And so respecting that in the process, because, you know, even something like this, like we all operate in this space and we're all even learning from each other. And so I think that's really important in those post-secondary places, is to have those places to have those conversations that are led by Indigenous people.
Chattis, you know, you being a current student at BCIT, are we doing enough?
Well, I for me personally, I've noticed such a difference in the past, I would say. Oh, now I'm going to feel old too. And I think I was in a post-secondary about 7 years ago, and I was at a VIU beforehand, and nothing of the sort in regards to land acknowledgement, talking about reconciliation, you know, whose traditional land this is. They're doing great now, but in the moment, you know, 7-8 years ago, it wasn't. It wasn't part of the conversation. So the fact that, you know, we're doing, you know, stuff like this and talking about it, which is some great first steps. And, you know, what are we going to do next, right? So it's important that we were talking about it, but, you know, what are the next steps? And you know, we can all collectively have different opinions on that, but we having this healthy conversation is the first step. So when I actually shown up to the broadcast center and I sat down, the first thing I saw on all the desktops is the land acknowledgement. I'm like, this is great. I have just never experienced this in a school setting. And then that's where my journey became to learn more about what BCIT is doing to help with Indigenous initiatives, the gathering place, which I now go to quite regularly, and create a safe place for Indigenous people to join and connect and connect with their culture, especially for myself being from the island and also what we call an urban Indigenous. So I'm not living on reserve and haven't lived on reserve for, again, I'm going to age myself, but 12 years. So you know, whether it's my show or like my show to connect with my culture, my heritage, or, you know, going to a post-secondary and having a source and an outlet to really connect and learn about cultural heritage, even if it's not directly my own, I really appreciate it. So that was a long-winded answer, but thanks for asking.
No, I love your insights. Merle, is there anything else that you would like to add regarding that?
Well, now I'm really going to age myself. I'm on the board of UVic, the Board of Governors, and I actually think there's something very concrete that you can do in British Columbia, which is that UVic is going to develop its own UNDRIP action plan. And that will apply to the business school. And I think there's going to be a lot of universities that will include, which of course will include their business schools, that have to start taking a hard look at how and what they're teaching students beyond land acknowledgements, because land acknowledgements are they're as important as they are. They're just the very, very beginning of the truth. You know, and I just think that there needs to be much more sort of substantive history taught to all school, like all faculties, including business schools. I think in business schools specifically, they need to understand some of the basics ideas of collective ownership versus individual ownership. They need to understand, like, they need to just, I guess in some ways, teach students to ask the right questions and inform them, like, you know, of the, like, of histories. I think it's incumbent on all schools, and sometimes business schools don't do that at all. Like, they sort of think, okay, well, the history stuff, if you want to learn history, go to the other faculty. We're learning about how to make money here, and that just is not like the corporate reality. So I think, like, the business schools have to learn history, and they need to learn Canadian history and Indigenous history the same as much as any other specific faculty. And I think that's going to bode them well if they want to be, like, if they want to survive and like, and be successful, have a successful brand that's going to, like, exist as probably, especially if they want to do business with Indigenous peoples, who are probably, like, the fastest growing, like, economic, like segment of Canadian society. I mean, if someone's going to be, like, continue to go on an upward trajectory, it's going to be Indigenous people. Of course, we have, like, a very low baseline, but if we're being, like, you know, truthful, but there's no way that there's not going to be any single other segment of society that's going to achieve greater prosperity in the next generations than Indigenous people. So, I mean, business students need to learn that reality. That happens in my faculty too in law. Like, people think, oh, I'm not going to take those Indigenous law courses. I don't want to practice Indigenous law. The moment they go to try and work at, like, mining company X or forestry company Y, they learn that the duty to consult is like real, and they should have, like, paid attention in class. So I mean, I think it's just time, like, that. I think business schools have to wise up also in terms of making sure that their students come out into the legal reality, or into the Canadian reality that, of course, they'll try and do business in.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah, we definitely have to tune in more, I think. The very last question that we have is, you know, if, for example, you're saying something like, you know, I would like my work to reflect a connection to Indigenous history, arts, and culture of where I live, but how do I do that? And you know, who wants to jump in on that one first? Because I think that's what a lot of our you know, folks here tonight want to know. How do you do it? Who wants to jump in?
I'll jump in and say that, you know, when again, as Merle says, land acknowledgement's the very small step that begins the process. But within that land acknowledgement, it tells you, you know, who are the people that are in your area, right? So after that, it's going online, going to their website, learning about them, and then making that connection and picking up the phone or driving to, you know, the band office based on, you know, COVID regulations. But you know what I mean? So, like, it's how much effort are you going to put in to make.
We lost you, Chattis.
Oh, sorry, I accidentally hit mute there. So how much effort and how far are you going to go to get that permission to make sure that you're using the work appropriately, and that your work reflects a connection to the local Indigenous history, the people, the culture. So making that effort, it's not as simple as just going on the website and understands. It's picking up the phone, it's writing emails, it's going in person. And again, as Keenan mentioned before, it's a relationship that you want to try and build. And so that way it's a friendship beyond just needing something. So that would be my thought on that one.
Oh, thank you, Chattis. Jamie, what do you think?
Okay, well, I'll be honest. We got these interview questions ahead of time. And when I first read this question, my initial reaction was why? You know, and I think that individual people really need to examine, you know, this goes to the relationship between, you know, if you're working on, you know, wanting to be an ally or being a good ally and allyship and all those sorts of things, and where it connects to your business or doesn't, you know, and I hate all these, like, buzzwords, but it's, you know, my question would always be, like, what is your motivation? Like, why do you need your business to reflect the local First Nation if you're not a local First Nation business? You know, and that might be uncomfortable for people, and I apologize, but it, you know, that would be like, I don't, I think there's a lot of value in things like if you want to partner, if you want to have joint ventures, if you want to do joint projects that are benefiting both the artist and the communities, and there's ways to do that. But if it's about designing, you know, logos or having this sort of, I guess, smoke screen around this relationship that isn't real, I guess I would really question the motivations behind that. And I would encourage gently, like anyone who's kind of saying, you know, I want to do this, why it is that you want to do that. And I think that that's important. And I think there's nothing wrong with, you know, being a business that is just a business that doesn't necessarily need to represent a community and a culture that isn't your own. And there's ways to have partnerships in that, but that would be my feedback. And I apologize if that's harsh, but that's what initially came to my mind.
No, I think that's fair comment. Keenan, I'm sure you want to add more.
Sure, yeah, no. I think people know if their heart is in the right place or not. If you're just doing it to make a quick buck, I'm with Jamie. But there are a lot of ways to incorporate Indigenous artwork into your business in a way that's authentic and real and is mutually beneficial, as Jamie was saying, to the community. So I've been personally working with a lot of like gift and souvenir shops, which is a very kind of controversial industry right now with using and misappropriating Indigenous artwork and Indigenous imagery. And what I've been trying to do is figure out ways to connect local suppliers instead of bringing in stuff from China, which is clearly misappropriating local Indigenous artwork. And really telling the story of the Indigenous artists that are local is something that's really boosting the businesses that we're working with.
Oh, yeah. Well, and actually, Ron was asking about in the chat here, give us some good examples, some positive examples where the relationships have worked. Merle, do you know of any?
No, I don't. I just kidding. I mean, well, I do see a lot of industry embracing sort of Aboriginal, like, you know, or Indigenous branding. But I think it's still more, I mean, you know, sort of like to pick up on the truth that Jamie shared, I think it's still very self-motivated, and it's also about trying to sort of like envelop yourself, blanket yourself in some sort of truth that is not your own. I mean, sure, there are like joint ventures. There's lots of examples, I think, of like successful, equitable joint ventures between, say, I know, in construction industry or drilling or something, where they use Indigenous branding, and they do develop that, like, do develop those relationships. Like, I still think the motivation is primarily for them to sort of have an advantage in contracting, not and to sort of also attract other, and almost sort of say, hey, look, we got this cool logo, and like Orca logo, doesn't that make you also want to have a joint venture with us, First Nation wide, you know, like, and then they produce a whole bunch of letters sort of saying, look how, like, here's a bunch of other like Indigenous people said were really cool too. So, you know, so they trade on that. But I mean, ultimately, it's still very self-driven. I don't know. I don't know that it's obviously not always like disingenuous. Like, I think that, like, you know, you should, in some respects, you shouldn't be, your company shouldn't seem foreign in the place that is like, in a place that is local, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like, so I think there's nothing, like, I think there's nothing negative about it, embracing like the culture in which your business is doing business, but to try and develop yourself and promote yourself as though you're something more, as though you are an Indigenous business, I think that's where it starts crossing the line. So I think it does go back to what Janie is saying, like, what's the motivation? Yeah. Like, is it just to make you look better, or is it actually because you genuinely are partners with Indigenous peoples, or you would have a really like respectful collaboration with Indigenous artists? If it's the latter, that's great. But if it's mostly for your own self-interest and to try and sort of exploit the Indigenous angle, which, I mean, I don't think people ever, we wouldn't have even been having an authenticity conversation, like 2 decades ago. Like nobody was trying to pretend to be Indigenous
No.
except for maybe Grail or something, you know,
Yeah.
but, you know, like, I mean, which is now like things have changed. We're trending or something, you know, as a people's actually like there's a cachet. But I mean, I think that if it's genuine and the motivation is true, then I think then that does make sense. But do your own work, do some homework on your own though. Don't just try and just go like, I mean, I'm sure that the local First Nations are probably tired of like fielding like really like, you know, well-meaning like non-Indigenous people who want to do more for them or something, especially in the last like year or so. So I think you have to like check your motivation, which is like circling back to what Jamie said and just saying it a whole bunch of different ways.
Yeah, it's the word is, I think, authentic, or, you know, an authentic, you know, direction. And you know, there's I see another question in the chat here from Scott from the BCIT marketing department, and he's asking that, you know, he's very sensitive to photographing Indigenous cultural experiences for BCIT, and we are sometimes asked not to share the imagery due to a performance, for example. And certainly in my own time as an Indigenous journalist, I still had to pay respect and ask that permission again before I started filming stuff. And so here's you know, one question, like how do we do that respectfully? You know, because I don't want to take over the answer on that one. Chattis, seeing as that you know, you're in the TV realm with this as well. You know, there are certain protocols we do need to keep in mind, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that question. I was actually really excited to answer it. So thank you so much, Scott, for putting that question out there. That's something that we were actually talking about quite recently in a class. We take a media law class with broadcasting with Francesca. And one of the things we talk about is different scenarios where it makes sense and doesn't make sense to do something. And just because it's the law doesn't mean I should do it or not. And the answer is no. You have to really gauge in that moment, right? So an example is if you see, you know, you're out on the street and there's a protest and you say there's some children there, you know, they're out in a public space. You can take pictures of children, but should you? And the answer is no. You should probably ask their parents, but yes, you can. So you have to really gauge those moments on when is it the right time to do it? Should I be doing this? And put yourself in their situation. So, you know, again, for people that are non-Indigenous, it's important to try and really focus. Okay, if I was them, you know, how would I want to be treated? How would I want this to be taken, and what do I want them to do with this image or this story or whatever is being documented, whether it's words or photography or film. So the best piece of advice I can give is very, again, congruent with Keenan's, is to ask for permission. And when you do that, you're being respectful, and that's the most important thing. And if they say, no, I don't want you to use it, well, you can't, and you have to move on. There's no such thing as off the record, and there's no such thing as not listening. You know, even if it's not Indigenous, you have to respect somebody's right that, you know, I don't want this document, or I don't want you to take this. So that's the best piece of advice I can give. An example.
Yeah. Does that help, Scott?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was actually we have a ceremony at BCIT. It's called Honoring Our Leaders, and it's a wonderful ceremony for the Indigenous students that are graduating, and it's put on by our Indigenous Initiatives group and a whole bunch of other community members. And it was just an example of where there was dancers, and I was photographing them because they were part of the bigger ceremony. And one of them did come up to me and said, we don't want you to be photographing this. And it was fine with me, but I was just a little bit taken aback. And then this discussion, I just wanted to say, has really clarified things in a lot of ways for me, because you know, I ended up photographing it for them, and I did not share the photos at all. I gave it to our Indigenous services, who passed it on to that group, and I just did it for their enjoyment, I suppose. It was one of the most beautiful dances I've ever seen, and it was just it was lovely.
And I think, like, I know for us at CTV, when we are approaching certain ceremonial instances where, you know, we want to be filming, whatever, we actually don't start filming until we've asked that permission. And certain aspects, like smudging, we won't film. So we'll be very, very cognizant of that. But it is, you know, I'm sure, you know, from your perspective, you know, you weren't necessarily aware. It's not that you were meaning to be disrespectful if someone felt that way. You were just, you know, embarking on what you thought you could do, and you were appreciating what was happening. But yeah, it's still that, you know, hey, I have to ask that permission. I have to find a way to respect what's happening here, right? I think everyone would agree that that's probably the best course of action. We are running out of time. I can't believe I honestly can't believe a whole hour has gone by. Caroline, should I just wrap this up here?
Sorry, here I am, I think. Hold on.
Okay, well, should I?
Sorry about this. I thought we were going a little longer, but that's fine. And if there's a last minute burning question, we can certainly, if the panel's okay with that, I think we can certainly maybe take one more. Are you okay with that, Julie?
Yeah, you know, there's a really good question in here from Ann Williams that I really like this quite a bit, coming from Plains Indian culture to here, you know, Coast Salish territory, and such a difference between art. And, you know, the question is, another issue is that there's this misconception that Indigenous art is homogenous, and that there's this belief among many non-Indigenous marketers that one image is representative of all First Nations. That's certainly not the case. And, you know, from her perspective, she says, you know, this was a very important teaching moment for her in cultural humility. I love that, cultural humility. And that's something we all have to have in mind, no matter who we meet. But is there anyone willing to jump in on that question?
Yeah, I can take a stab. But yeah, I was getting to this earlier a little bit with talking about, you know, that we aren't monoliths, you know, and there are some crossovers sometimes. Like you might see Anishinaabe beadwork next to Métis beadwork next to Cree beadwork and Gwich'in, and there may be some similarities that could have come through trade or any of those kinds of intermarrying, those different kinds of things. But you know, we also have things that are really distinctly to our regions and our different styles. And so choosing, you know, one, it would be like me as an Anishinaabe artist going and doing form line work from the West Coast. Like they're vastly different things, and just because I'm Indigenous does not give me right to go and appropriate from within our own cultures either. And I think that's super, super important, you know, for people to understand. And yeah, I had a story that I was going to share, and I totally have drawn a blank, but anyway, oh, that's what I was going to say is, you know, I had this funny conversation. I don't care. I can talk about it because I didn't do the work, but I was contacted twice last year, once by Disney and once by Netflix. And Disney contacted me to bead a Cree pad saddle. And I was like, I'm not Cree,
Right.
you know, and actually trying to actually get through those conversations with people. And the other one was to do Inuit beadwork, you know, and I'm, you know, actually trying to explain to these guys are giant businesses with every resource at their fingertips. And it's really intimidating for individual artists to have to go into that room. I mean, it's super cool for Disney to call you on your cell phone.
Oh yeah.
But you know, like that's so cool. But it's also like it sometimes blows my mind that in this day and age, like we're still having those conversations, and you almost get like, if you kind of say, you know, this isn't appropriate, you actually need to contact Inuit artists and I can help you do so. You almost get like blacklisted or like by, you know, and there's that whole interesting dynamic to it too. But I think that whole piece around that we're all very distinct nations is really important.
So here you are trying to be respectful, exactly what we're talking about, that even within all these different First Nations, that's what you're trying to do, is show the respect. Say, I'm not
Exactly.
gonna, because it would be a type of misappropriation for you too.
Absolutely. And that's a big part of the conversation too, for sure.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in before we get to Scott? Because it looks like Scott has one more question. Chattis?
Yeah, the only other thing I'd like to add is that it really boils down to really, again, doing your research and going beyond what you see, right? So actually, Francesca, who I mentioned before, the media law professor, did a really great article a couple years back regarding, Indigenous artwork that's being sold as Indigenous artwork, but it in fact is made in a factory in China, right? And that's it. That's a whole separate realm of conversation that we won't get into today. But the point is that, like, it happens, right? And a lot of people do it unknowingly. It's tourists in downtown Vancouver. Gastown's a big example of that, where you can walk into stores that say Canada on it, and people have the full confidence that I'm buying something that is Indigenous, that I'm supporting people, and when in fact they're not, and that's so damaging to artists like Jamie and lots of other artists that are putting in the work and the effort to break down those barriers of misappropriation and not using the art correctly. So I just wanted to add that little comment in there, but we'll get to Scott's question there.
Okay, thank you so much, Chattis. Scott, did you want to jump in with another quick question?
Yeah, just quick. I mean, this conversation is excellent, and I just want to thanks Julie for moderating, and to the panel, and to the School of Business for putting this on. It's really, really timely. It probably is beyond its time. And the question I have is actually something you had all brought up and had a discussion about, and that's businesses. I guess I don't know how to word this, but I'm going to use BCIT as an example. Under our current president, recognizing Indigenous culture is very important, and recognizing that Indigenous students and their unique issues they might face at BCIT with respect to our gathering place that Chattis had mentioned. It's a wonderful space, and we have that space, and we have new buildings going up, and one of the key aspects to these new buildings is Indigenous artwork in the space. And I guess I'm just wondering, you see it all over, Indigenous artwork in all, like, you go into a lawyer's office downtown, it's Indigenous artwork everywhere. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Like, we have a house post that was created for our new building, a gateway building, and it's beautiful, but I'm just gonna throw it out. What's your thoughts on that?
Who would like to jump in? What do you think, Keenan?
If I could just repeat the question back, and if Scott, you could just confirm that I've kind of heard it correctly. Are you asking about, like, Indigenous artwork within buildings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, is that appropriation? Is that trying, like, I guess it comes back to your main point, which was, what's your motivation, right?
Yeah.
What's the motivation behind it? And so I don't know what BCIT's motivation is. I think
I
it's
can't
genuine.
speak for everybody, but when I see something that's celebratory of a culture and the correct steps have been kind of taken to put that piece of art there, I think it's awesome. I think it's when I walk into the Vancouver airport and I know that, some of my friend like Eric Prytula's artwork is in there, and I know that he got paid for it, and like he's getting credit for it and getting extra exposure on a global level because airport travelers are coming in. I'm excited. I'm stoked for the artist. I'm stoked for the airport, and I'm stoked for me because it looks pretty cool.
Yeah. Jamie, did you want to jump in?
Sure. I actually agree with Keenan. Like, I love it. I think it's fantastic, you know, with certain caveats, of course, that like, you know, the artists are paid fairly and they're credited. It's like, you know, there's like a tagline that's like shop Indigenous made, not Indigenous inspired. And that's always, I think, a really great guideline to stick to. That's really simple. But yeah, I mean, I think that actually getting Indigenous artwork into these big spaces where it's really visible, you know, it just increases visibility. It's yeah, I think it's great. And personally, as an artist, I obviously think it's great. And I think we're getting a lot better at crediting and paying appropriately and all those kinds of things. And so that's what I would say personally. I think it also just kind of creates those safer spaces. And yeah.
Okay, well, awesome. I agree. I think it's so awesome when those steps are taken, and then we are creating work for these talented artists. Zach, we'll just take this one last question. Zach, did you have something you want to jump in on?
Sure. I have a bit of a sidestep that's kind of related to the last question. So this has come up a lot with students. Actually, I'm from the broadcast program as well. I teach with Julie, and so I'm curious on the panel's take on non-Indigenous people getting Indigenous artwork in their tattoos. This has become kind of a big topic, and I have a group that happens to be doing a documentary about this, and I find it really intriguing, and I'd love to hear the take on, you know, is there a right way to go about this? There's certainly many wrong ways, I think, given what you've all said. But yeah, I'm just curious to hear the take on that.
Whoa, who wants to dive into that one?
I'm gonna take. Sorry, Keenan. I'm gonna take a quick stab at it, and I actually ran into this with a guest on my show, and their designers out in Nanaimo, and they design beautiful dresses. I think it's eight lay limits called, and they have beautiful dresses and they had their work recently displayed at the New York, the New York, I don't know, fashion, like the New York walkway where they like go down to do the fashion walk.
Fashion Week in New York.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. So they have their artwork there, and the thing to note is that all the models in New York are white women. So so they're wearing like full Native regalia. They have no connection to the Native cultural heritage and whatnot. But for them, it didn't matter for them because it was putting out that image in a public space, and you having it reach the other side of the world meant more to them than, you know what, we need to have, you know, Indigenous models here and to do this. And they do that locally on the island. They do have shows with Indigenous models, but for them, the exposure meant more to them than, them being Indigenous models. Now, I'm sure that's a very, not everybody's going to agree with that, but that's how they felt, right? So, but it's so hard to answer that, Zach, because you can take the dress off when you're done, right? You can't take the tattoo off when you're done, right? Yeah. So that, again, I'm like getting close to trying to answer, but again, I'm taking my question back, just like you can take off the clothing. You can backtrack. So that's a really difficult one to handle, but
here our message has been tonight that, you know, you should be paying that respect by asking the permission. Do you ask for permission if something's going to be on your arm or, you know, wherever else that, you know, might be meaningful for different reasons? And, you know, Jamie, what do you think? I don't have any tattoos, so I don't know. But Jamie, what do you think?
I think this is a super tough question. It's like, I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot-ball. I think there is something to be said. Like, a lot of nations that had tattooing that was a real cultural practice.
Yeah,
that's really rooted in that. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think there's, you know, I don't know if anybody saw this, but Quanah Chasing Horse is an Indigenous model who's like been just blowing up in the States. She's unbelievable. She has chin tattoos that are earned and are given to her culturally for different specific things that is very personal. And after she wore those at the Met Gala, or sorry, she didn't wear them, after she, you know, was photographed at the Met Gala, like 2 days later, Angelina Jolie showed up with like this huge metal piece that she wore in her lip that was mimicking these traditional tattoos. And so like that was like hugely problematic and probably could be stepping into that boundary of appropriation. And it's just an example of something that happened very recently. And I think that each one of our nations owns tattooing differently across the world. And so tattooing Indigenous symbolism, like I would not go and get a Mohawk tattoo. I would not go and get a form line tattoo. So for myself personally, that would be, I just wouldn't do that. So I guess, again, I would go back to that question of motivation.
Yes. Why?
Yeah.
100%. So sorry, Zach, we couldn't really give you the clear answer that you were looking for.
No, that's all good. I really appreciate the take on it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that was an awesome journalist type question for sure. Get to the tough stuff here at the very end. Caroline, should we?
So sorry, I'll jump in because I'm just wondering if members of the panelists have a last words of wisdom, either for our students or for our faculty that here. Obviously, we've seen a few faculty. We have people from our marketing department at BCIT. So just if each of you have a quick little wrap up, in a few seconds, or if you want to say something.
I think I can just whittle it down to like my 3 points is ask permission, give credit, and offer compensation. And if you do that, I think you're going to be safe.
Yeah. Jamie or Chattis or Merle?
Yeah, I just again, pretty much on the same field as Keenan's to just really take the time and motivate yourself to push the limit on how far you're going to go to get that permission, right? And make sure, again, when you're getting that permission, make sure it's the right person, because some people may think they have the right to give that permission, and you might be sadly mistaken. And again, as a studying journalist, that's something that we're instilled in the teaching, is to really spend the time to make sure that that source is the proper source. So just taking time to do that. And I want to thank for the invitation to come on this panel, and for everybody involved and everybody watching. And just want to feel very grateful to be here. And thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I'll go. So Jamie has the last word. Yeah, I mean, I guess the simple thing that I want to say is now I could end as a lawyer, the way lawyers. I think people should understand that misappropriating is breaking the law. So unless you want a world of pain, you shouldn't steal. So I mean, I think that I think people need to understand it's not just some sort of like cryptic ethical moral question. If you're doing something, if you're misappropriating, you're breaking the law. And like, there's so many different ways that there's been bad examples that you can learn from to do better. And I think one of the most important parts of that sort of like breaking the law aspect is that you have to honor that there is a legal system that Indigenous peoples have that also apply to our cultural symbols. And you do that like in itself has sort of like a triple ethical sort of like breach, I think, that you have to be mindful of.
Thank you, Merle.
Merle, that definitely should have been the final word. Definitely. I think I like simple things that I would remind people of is like, yeah, shop Indigenous made and not Indigenous inspired. And I think it really goes back to like, before you even get to, those 3 steps that Keenan's talking about, I think you really need to examine your motivation and really answer that question before you even get to that point. And yeah, that's what I would say. And I just want to thank everybody for sitting through all of this, and everyone on the panel, and for the invitation. And yeah, Nimiwi miigwech for having me.
Jamie, I do have a question. Where do you buy your jewelry and your art? Because it's on my list. It's going to be on my list for Christmas this year. I never know what to put.
Oh, thank you.
Where do you buy it?
I have a website. I do, I really focus my practice in slow fashion and heirloom stuff. So I don't sort of mass produce or anything like that. So it's small batch release and that sort of a thing. So I often don't have pieces on the website, but it is a website, whiteotterdesignco.com. Same on social media, but
and it's a very, very good website. I think
it is. Keenan made my website.
I'm assuming the earring you're wearing, are those yours?
They're not. No, they're
not.
They're by an American artist, Jordan Collins.
Okay, they're beautiful.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. I am truly honored to have had the opportunity to spend the last hour and 22 minutes with you, a little bit more because I got the honor of seeing you 15 minutes before. But also, I just want to thank you for your teachings and for what you taught me today. I think it was a great gift that you gave me today in sharing your knowledge and your experience. So I seriously, I really appreciate this. And Jamie, thank you as an artist. I think you provide a different voice and a quite experiential one. So really, thank you. Merle, I feel that University of Victoria is very, very lucky to have them on your board of governor. Wow, this is amazing. And working in the business school right now, your word when you said, business school needs to wise up really resonated with me. So I have my business school leadership meeting tomorrow morning, and that's probably going to be one of the things I'm going to share about this session. So thank you. Chadis, the opportunity to engage with students. You're a very wise student, and I think we're going to see great things out of you, and always really proud to work with students and to have students hopefully will stay connected after. And Keenan, I think you're so involved that we should offer you a job, really. So maybe we should talk. So anyway, thank you again for accepting it to be here, Keenan. And Julie, I just learned to know, we just met for the first time last week. Boy, what an honor to work at the same institution as such an accomplished person. So hopefully we'll have the chance to maybe go for coffee or something to debrief on today. But thank you very much for leading this. So I guess sorry, go ahead, Julie.
I just say thank you to the committee again for bringing us all together. And I can't believe so many people still with us, right up until, almost 45 minutes over. So thank you for being here. And thank you so much for having us all here to discuss this. So we're on the way to healing, and we just got to keep on learning. So thank you.
Thank you.